decades, from this day to that, for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. One thing I'm probably going to start off with is something that has been in the media for a little bit, but I haven't really covered it too much. But it deals with Donald Trump and his pledges to fight this climate change, which a lot of people know I don't believe in this climate change agenda that is being pushed. I don't believe mankind is completely, responsible for climate change. I do believe climate change happens. I think ice core samples and soil samples have proven that it's happened long before humans ever roamed this earth. So, it becomes something that it's played upon using people's fears, I believe. And a lot of the agenda doesn't really make sense. Pay taxes and all of a sudden climate change will be okay. Not really something I believe in. I do believe there's some scientists out there that believe that, mankind plays a big part in it. I think we play a minuscule part compared to the sun. And, we see climate change a lot of times kind of construed also with how the earth operates. Many people think, well, all earthquakes will stop when you stop, fracking. Well, no, a lot of these earthquakes that are happening on fault lines that have moved before. And a lot of times what you also see is a lot of these fault lines have actually had a lot more catastrophic shifts, and they're overdue for one. Will that be blamed on fracking? Yeah, it probably will. Now, does fracking play some type of environmental risk? Yes. You can be on both sides of an issue because you have political and power grab agendas being played on both sides. So if you start looking at the facts of the situation, you see both sides are being played. A lot plays into the whole climate change debate too, where you do have people trying to argue that climate isn't changing. If anything, it's staying more constant. No, I believe climate's constantly changing. We've had many ice ages in our, own. And when you also look at it, when you look at America, the U.S., we don't produce anything even remotely near what we used to produce. Factories used to put out a lot more. Your home, a lot of homes were heated with oil and coal, and wood, where we have more, natural gas and, cleaner burning fuels, um, to continue to try to play that card and for people to buy into it. I think it has gotten to a whole nother level. I'm going to get in a Ron Paul Liberty Report right now, and this is a interview too with a climate change dissident. I mean, someone that was a professor, and when they started running their own climate change data, well, it wasn't going along with the narrative that's being put out there for the agenda to be furthered. So let's go ahead and dive into this.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Co-host today, Daniel McAdams. Daniel's with us. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. We have an exciting guest today. We're going to talk about climate and find out all the answers and maybe a few questions, too. And the individual we're going to be talking with today is Judith Curry, who's been in the news lately, and she has taught and been very much involved in climatology, has a degree and a PhD from the University of Chicago in 1982 in geophysical science. And she has good credentials, and she was in the news recently because she became a little bit frustrated with the system. So Judith, Dr. Curry, welcome to our program today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, this is wonderful because there's a lot of questions I have, and they're honest questions about trying to sort it all out. Because as libertarians, we're very concerned about pollution and how you handle it in a free society developed with property rights. And, and that involves a lot of controversial things about how do you do borders and international borders and state borders and all these things. But this is not just pollution. I would like to know a little bit about your views on, pollution versus climate change and this sort of thing. But you were in the news recently, and you've gotten a lot of attention because on principle, you resigned a position that you held for 16 years at the University of Georgia. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background, if you'd like, as well as what led to the controversy that I'm alluding to just recently.
Well, I've been in academia since 1982 when I got my PhD. And until 2005, I just kept my head down and worked on the little problems that I thought were interesting and important. In 2005, I was co-author on a paper that was published right after Hurricane Katrina that was about increasing hurricanes with increasing sea surface temperature. And this really set off the global warming alarms. And so I was thrown into the public debate on climate change in a very big and unpleasant way at that time. Now, at that time, I thought it was the responsible thing to support the IPCC consensus. I bought into the meme, don't just trust what one scientist says. We should trust what these hundreds of and thousands even of climate scientists have concluded based on years of deliberation. Okay, so I was a little bit uneasy about how they handled uncertainty, but I really didn't give it too much thought. That all changed in 2009 with the release of the ClimateGate emails. If you've heard about this, right. This was the unauthorized release of emails from the University of East Anglia that showed climate scientists trying to keep data out of the hands of people they disagree with, trying to thwart the publication of certain papers and things like that. And I was rather appalled, and I started speaking out. And my biggest concern was that once I saw the sausage making that went into this IPCC consensus, I mean, I was no longer convinced that this was something that I should support. So I started digging into some of these issues on my own, and I became less and less convinced the more I dug. And so I started voicing public concerns about overconfidence in the IPCC report, about inadequate attention to uncertainty, raising concerns about data transparency. And I thought these things should be all motherhood and apple pie kinds of statements, but my colleagues didn't like this at all. The fact that I had criticized the consensus made me very unpopular. In fact, my early statements were followed by an article in the Scientific American in 2010. Climate heretic Judith Curry turns on her colleagues. This was in the Scientific American. So I, became rather ostracized and pushed over to the other side of the debate. And it became a very unpleasant situation for me professionally. And so I could,
Judith, from my viewpoint and viewing this and trying to sort it out, it was always about global warming. And then there was a shift in terminology. It went to sort of like weather reports, and now it's climate change. And those who question what was going on, they say, see, there really wasn't a lot of global warming. They're making excuses that it's climate change now because there's questions about global warming. Is that a shift that you were involved in? And help me understand exactly what was going on there on the public relations part on why the verbiage was changing.
Well, I think a motivation for the change in verbiage was the slowdown in global warming, and they wanted to broaden the discussion. Precipitation is also important. It's not just temperature. Sea ice, glaciers, all these other things. It's not just temperature. So the problem I have with climate change is the implicit use of the term implies that all climate change is caused by humans, and that's how it's commonly used in the public discourse, and that's absolutely not true. There's lots of natural climate variability, and to my mind, the huge issue of scientific debate is whether the recent warming is mostly natural causes or human caused. We still don't know.
Mm-hmm. Daniel?
Yeah, Professor, it's interesting. You think of scientists, you think of sober, staid people, but from reading what happened to you after your scientific inquiries led you in a different direction, there was such a violent backlash among your colleagues. How do you describe this? Why were they so, violent rhetorically at least, and what sorts of things did they do?
Well, there's a growing activist wing amongst climate scientists who they seem to be motivated by two reasons. One is, genuine environmental, leftish, liberal kind of politics. And the other one is careerism. And, they see this as a ticket to more funding for the field and to fame and fortune for their own scientific reputations, seats at the big policy discussion tables, and so on. So it's become, a self-fulfilling thing. And all the individuals that are in power, so to speak, in our field, that are presidents of the professional associations, editor of the journals, are all seem to be supporting the IPCC consensus, and you can imagine how that trickles down into difficulties in trying to get your papers published or your grants funded if you have a different perspective.
Go ahead. Finish. I had another question along this line, and it has to do with the significance of sunspots. A lot of times that's been mentioned, and a lot of times that has been ridiculed. Tell me what the significance of sunspots are.
Well, solar variations are important, and sunspots reflect some elements of solar variability. The big issue in my mind is the indirect effects on the climate from variations in the sun. This could be cosmic rays or other indirect effects from the sun that we don't fully understand. So I think there has not been sufficient attention given to the solar effects. Now, I will add is that there's a team of very reputable scientists in Russia who think that we are headed for a substantial solar minimum mid-21st century. It remains to see how that will play out, and if it does play out, what effect this would have on the climate. But that is a possible scenario that I think climate scientists should be looking at more closely.
Daniel?
Yes, the idea of settled science is such an unsettling idea in itself. What does it say for science where, for someone, I remember reading about Ignaz Semmelweis, the doctor who discovered that washing your hands antiseptic saved lives, and he was ridiculed to the point of really losing his sanity. And now it's conventional wisdom. And there's so many things that are supposedly settled that actually aren't settled at all. How do you survive? How does science survive if this kind of tyrannical approach to discovery?
I have a few ideas on that and examples of that, but I want to hear from the professor.
Okay, well, there are a few things that are settled. Yes, it's overall been warming for several hundred years. Humans do emit carbon dioxide from various activities.
To live.
And carbon dioxide does emit infrared radiation. Those are the things that everybody agrees on. The more consequential issues are there's substantial agreement, like how much of the warming was caused by humans versus natural variability. How will the climate of the 21st century play out? Is warming dangerous? And can we afford, what are the unintended consequences of trying to slow down the warming in some way? We don't know the answers to those questions. And by putting a group of scientists in a room and having them negotiate an agreement and then try to enforce it as a scientific consensus, well, that's not science. I mean, that's politics or something. I don't know what it is, but it's not science. As scientists, it's our job to continually question the evidence and challenge and reinterpret the conclusions. And disagreement is how science moves forward. And we're stifling all this in context of the debate on climate change. So what we do about it, I mean, I've made suggestions, but I look forward to any ideas that you have.
Well, having spent a few years in Congress, scientific issues came up, and it was always a bit annoying, having had a little bit of background in science, that all of a sudden everybody was an expert, and they were voting on science rather than the principles of liberty and the principles of how you get things done in a voluntary fashion, how you protect real education and these sorts of things. But it was really quite annoying that all these experts were casting votes based on certain things. But, if you take one example that I've used on this, science has settled it, when you think of how many thousands of years it was absolutely settled by the current scientists about the Earth being flat, and especially the Earth being the center of the universe. It's been a short period of time in history, 600 years since we figured it out that that's not the case. And believe me, back then it was settled, and it had a religious connotation. And they said, well, that was the religious fault. But I think that we almost live in an age where some of this environmentalism and global warming and this talk almost has a religious fervor to it. And I don't know whether you've been on the receiving end of that or know what I'm talking about on what I sense.
Well, I've been called a heretic. Heresy implies dogma, and So climate change has really become dogma, and it's more about politics at this point. And its supporters have a religious fervor. The vast majority who don't understand even the basics of climate science, but nevertheless, they're absolutely convinced they know what it is and how to solve it and everything else. Right. So, the word heretic has been frequently used to describe me, and that in some ways says it all. This has become dogma.
Wear the label proudly, Daniel.
Yeah, it's interesting, we have a new administration, and, at least at times, President Trump has expressed some skepticism about the received wisdom on climate change. There's even been some suggestion of getting out of the Paris Agreement. You mentioned, I think it's a perfect term, unintended consequences. He talks about the unintended economic consequences of this sort of thing. I was just looking at the Independent newspaper. Professor Michael Mann, who you probably know at Penn State, said that climate scientists must rebel against Trump's assault on science. What might they do, and what might Trump do, and how might that help maybe your situation?
I'll start with talking about President Obama to show you the contrast with President Trump. President Obama, who's somebody who really cares about science and knows something about it, but what he did with his policies and his selection of advisors is he politicized the science and scientized the policy debates. And that's not healthy for either science or politics. Now, in Donald Trump, I see someone who doesn't particularly pay attention to science. That doesn't make him anti-science in any way, but science is not at the top of the list of things he's worrying about. He wants to listen to his advisors, on various technical issues, and that's not an unreasonable approach. With regards to climate change, his statements about climate change, the Chinese hoax and all that, are really not related to science. They're related to the economic consequences. And that's what he cares about, and that's what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, his collection of advisors are not singing from the same hymn book on the issue of climate change. They have a range of perspectives, and I think that's actually a healthy situation because there are we don't really know. There's across the U.S. population, there's a range of perspectives. Across the population of scientists, there's a range of perspectives. So I think the mix of his advisors includes some healthy skepticism as well as an interest in sort of going along with what, the UN has decided to do. So this may make it a more healthy environment for climate policy. In terms of climate science, I think in the Obama administration, we spent too much money on big global climate models and only focusing on human-caused climate change. I think we need to get back to the data, including paleoclimate data. We need to do fundamental climate dynamics research and better understand the climate system. So, and I also think we need to focus on some shorter time scales, like seasons to decades, where we have a better chance of being able to make some useful predictions. And this is where the real societal impacts are. I mean, trying to anticipate what societies are going to be like 300 years from now is sort of a pointless exercise.
Judith, I have one more question, and we're going to have to close. But I wanted to get you to comment on something I believe I read that you said, and that is when you broke from the university system, and that's just recent, you finally had it, and you're on your own, you're still very interested in this, and you will pursue this in another fashion. But you mentioned that you compared, going private with the university or the government systems, and you sort of looked at them, in a negative way. But you see those as two separate groups. Sometimes I think of the university educational system and the amount of money they get from government and the government that might not even be involved with the university. Do you see them as one thing, or are there really sharp divisions between the two?
Certainly the public universities depend very much on government and state funding. There are a few private colleges and small universities that seem to be more independent, but they still rely on government grants. So, yeah, it's one. And some elements of the private sector are sort of embedded in that. Where the independence lies, I think, is in small companies like my own little company, Climate Forecast Applications Network, and also the extended peer community, people that are active in the blogosphere and people who are doing work, some of whom are retired or semi-retired or some who are doing research on their own time that don't have any formal appointments in government or universities. They just have the technical training and the interest to do some of this research on their own. So this is where we're seeing some of the real independent perspectives coming from.
You know, the way you describe it reminds me of the, challenge that we have, because we talk about a certain type of economic policy, a freer market. But if you go to the universities, they get a lot of grants, and even the professors who do a lot of paper and a lot of work and a lot of contracting with the Federal Reserve, it always seems supportive of that system, and we're trying to introduce other ideas. So in a way, it infiltrates not only in the science, but also in economic policy, and I'm sure it's the same way on some of the foreign policy. But we're going to have to go, but you did mention your company, so I want you to mention that again to let our viewers know where they can go. And we will also post this on the website so they know how to follow up and continue to find out what you're talking about and what you're blogging these days.
Okay, my company is Climate Forecast Applications Network. The website is cfanclimate.net. I also blog at judithcurry.com. So check both of those out and come join the discussion at my blog, Climate, Etc.
Okay, that's wonderful. And Judy, thank you very much for being with us. This is an interesting subject. I think it's very important because it involves politics and science. And to me, it's fascinating, but it's also dangerous if we don't get to hear both sides of the story. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And I want to thank our viewing audience today for joining us for this fascinating discussion on a very important subject. So please check Judy Curry's and her website. And also, thank you for joining us today at the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, ronpaullibertyreport.com. and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, again, one thing that was mentioned was one scientist that says we need to have a rebellion against Trump. We see this coming out of a lot of politically entrenched scientists. And one that really jumps out at me is Bill Nye. Bill Nye has been on the climate change bandwagon, but he's also been basically a spokesperson for many alternative energy things. He had there was that one show, I forget what it was called, but it was following one scientist that happened to be friends with Bill Nye, and they were, pushing, how can we make our houses greener? And that was a big spiel with that whole deal, which I'm not against. If you can put windmills or solar panels or build your house in a way that is greener, I would definitely say, hey, go do it. But it's also one of those things you can't force that upon people. Definitely when, even today, even though the prices have dropped, a poor family or even a lower middle class family doesn't have the extra cash, even probably the middle ground in the middle class does not have the extra cash to invest in that. Even if it saves them dollars in the long run, they have to have that initial cash. And you go, well, that's why you make sure your credit's good and you can put on your credit cards or get a loan well, so now they're in debt. Now they have to pay interest. They don't save those dollars in the long run. You can't force that upon someone that can't afford it. And that's the problem. They really want to force that. And they go, well, if you can't afford to drive the $80,000 fuel efficient car, you shouldn't drive them. That would be the argument, and they're already making that argument in a lot of very politically ran cities that have a lot of environmental groups helping run the politics of these areas. They're already talking about making them driverless cities. You have to walk or ride a bicycle or take a mass transit. There will be roads that maybe go through town, but they'll be limited to fuel efficient cars, and what that limit will be. What do they consider fuel efficient? A hybrid or a battery operated car. They might go, well, a hybrid is better than a gasoline, but it still has a gasoline motor. We don't want that. So now you spend all that money on that hybrid that's part electric, part gas, but that wasn't the $80,000 car they want you to buy. And, again, it's a forced culture and society change, and it never turns out good. Definitely for the less advantaged people that don't have the money or the ability to continue to basically go about their life the same way they are now. They will be, well, you can't drive a car into the city. So now, if you live on the outskirts of the city and you work in the middle of the city, you either going to have to pay for mass transit, you're going to have to walk or ride a bike. It'd probably be better off if you just moved closer where you could just walk a couple blocks. And we know what the whole force culture is like, but they're going to, and they've already basically said they're going to use climate change for that. They want taxes, they want greener cities, and there's a reason they say cities. There's a reason you see a lot of the major cities always going along with these agendas, a lot of them coming out of United Nations, which used to be called Agenda 21. They have basically reworded it, moved things around, and renamed it Vision. I've heard, I forget what they're calling it. I think they're calling it Vision 2030 or something like that. And then they're implementing it in a lot of major cities in each state, and they're calling it, Vision 2020 or Vision 2025, or some of them Vision 2030, but a lot of them have it sooner than that. And then what you also see within those cities is they broaden their grip into that county. Happening here in Indiana, in the Midwest, in the middle of the country. But it's only happening in the cities that, do this. And even if you're not in a major city, you have to be really careful because they're implementing it in a different way in the smaller rural areas. And what they've done there is, well, let's say you got a whole bunch of property. Well, if there's an area that maybe the creek overflows now, it doesn't flow, they're not going to dredge it. They're not going to dredge that creek to prevent your property from flooding. What they're going to say is nature corrected itself. That is now considered a wetlands area. You are not to till the ground. Basically, don't disturb it, but pay the taxes on it until you argue it to the point that you end up giving the property away because you don't want to pay taxes on property you can't do anything on. And at that point, you know, they get what they want. They take swaths of property away from people. Well, if you can't have a whole bunch of property that you can do what you want on, why are you going to live so far away from a lot of times your work? Counties and areas that surround bigger cities, people move there but work within the city because that's, you know, where they give all the tax breaks to the businesses for the most part. Plus, well, they can have a lot of employees to go through when they're in a large city. But then a lot of the people that can afford it, they move out of the city. They live outside of the city. But why? Why, if you can't have property and can't have that freedom you once had? Well, they're slowly implementing these things using, you know, climate change and, well, you know, everything's because humans try to harness, you know, the earth. That's basically the base argument they try to come down to. But what you see is actually the humankind has played dual parts in that. There's a duality to it. Because even though there's times that humans probably do pretty good harm, you take down complete rainforest. Not probably a good idea. I kind of like how they've done it here in Indiana, where, you know, there are areas where you can see for a long while, but there's also a lot of areas where a lot of the farmers have taken kind of a different step where there are, you know, 20-acre woods, 30-acre woods, 50-acre woods just spotted throughout all the fields. You know, it's all broken up so that there is woods there. There is habitat. There is wind breakage. They've seen the importance of that. Plus, a lot of people in the rural area are hunters, so they want to know that, you know, the wildlife on their property has good habitat and food. Many farmers that have large property that also hunt, you know, they plant, you know, native grasses and other things for wildlife. And, you know, that even goes back to the hunting, you know, it seems these groups are so intertwined, the environmentalists and the anti, you know, hunters type people, you know, because we have people living where animals used to live, because we just, our presence has, you know, changed the balance of things. We have to correct that too. There, in a lot of areas, are less predators to other species. Therefore, we become that replacement predator. And there's places, you know, close to city limits where people just don't hunt. And, you know, I've run across this a lot, where you'll be driving, down a road and there's nothing but additions or houses, and there's not really any fields right there. Um, and you'll have wildlife just running across your path. Give me a second here. Okay. And I worked in the city. I still work in the city. But one place I worked in the middle of the city, you know, there's no woods or anything around. And I'm outside on break. I'm sitting there, and here comes a deer right across my path. Well, I end up running into the glass door of a store, apparently, and kind of caused a little havoc. People were in the parking lot. This thing come full blast. People are trying to get out of the way. Runs in the door, confuses itself, and there's kids and people in harm's way. When you don't have natural predators, that tends to be what happens. And if you think the wildlife just is going to disappear, you're sadly mistaken. Well, when people look at deer, they might not see natural, that's a danger. They go, oh, it's a deer. But when you've seen the coyote, people, feared that. Or seen the wolf, people feared that. You don't want wolves in packs roaming the city streets at night. You're even during the day. Your kids are not probably going to be too safe. Same with the pack of feral dogs. It's not a good thing. So there's legitimate, concern about allowing, animals to roam. But then you create a bigger problem, because then you got rid of one group of animals, so the other group gets bigger. And even though they might not attack you, hunt you down, put enough of those in a congested area and they are just as dangerous. So when we're looking at, a lot of the arguments that come out against hunting out, against, climate change deniers, which most people aren't, they just say that it's not all because of mankind. There's legitimate issues that mankind, contributes to, but when it comes to the overall planet climate, there's other factors that are playing a lot bigger parts. Okay. Give me a second here. Now, I might agree with what Donald Trump might be trying to do with the climate change, but what I have a problem with is we hear so much, raising of hell over the mil or the immigration ban, what they're calling the Muslim ban, which it's not, but basically a travel ban, a temporary one to try to reassess our immigration policy and our vetting of the refugees and immigrants coming in. We're not talking really about what's causing all this. we have to realize a lot of it has to deal with Obama and his administration and under his watch, why this is such a big problem. But is it changing under Donald Trump? Are we changing our foreign policy to try to prevent these issues? And that's something I'm not seeing too much. And I got a clip here from We Are Change I want to get into. We'll go ahead and dive into this right now.
I wanted to make this video specifically for Donald Trump supporters who care about ending radical Islamic terrorism. And I think this video could also provide some context to the people who are protesting Donald Trump right now. But please, whatever you do, watch all the facts presented to you in this video before leaving a comment and debate me on this important topic. Now, as we know, we are finding out that a U.S. commando died recently in Yemen over counterterrorism raids that took place in that country. Now, military officials have been planning this raid and debating it for months under Barack Obama's administration, but Barack Obama decided to leave this choice up to Trump to personally authorize or not. And Donald Trump did personally authorize this counterterrorism operation himself, continuing the failed foreign policy initiatives by Barack Obama. In the American mainstream media, we heard a lot about this U.S. serviceman that was killed, but we never heard about any civilian casualties. We never heard about any collateral damage. And the military has been very quiet about this, but we're getting reports that 10 women and children were killed in this counterterrorism operation. One of them, an 8-year-old girl, the daughter of Anwar al-Awlaki. This is a sad and tragic death, which led this 8-year-old girl to be shot in the neck and bleed out until she died for over 2 hours. It's important for context to know that Anwar al-Awlaki's son was also assassinated and murdered, but by Barack Obama, and he was a 16-year-old normal American citizen from Colorado that Barack Obama and his drone program assassinated without the due process of law. And the only initial comments that we got from the Obama administration was when this very news organization had to hound down his spokesperson, Robert Gibbs. And the thing he said was, well, this 16-year-old American citizen from Colorado just should have had a better father before we decided we're going to kill him outside of the law. Now, it's not only grief that I'm feeling for and pain that I'm feeling for this 8-year-old girl and these innocent children that are caught up in this global war on terrorism. It's also the U.S. soldier that doesn't get to come back to his family, that a life of one of our own, one of our bravest, has been ended prematurely. And I have to ask the question, for what? Because let's look at Yemen. Why are we in Yemen? Can you give me an answer on that? I could walk on the street right now, and I bet no American citizen, maybe some, very few would actually even understand what's happening in Yemen. Yemen was caught up in a civil war since 2015. I'm going to oversimplify this, but there was two major factions, a pro-government side that was pro-Saudi Arabia and an anti-government side that was anti-Saudi Arabia. When the anti-government side started winning, Saudi Arabia got the United States involved, and the United States started bombing the crap out of Yemen. Now, the raid that was conducted in Yemen was conducted on a group that was not focused on global jihad. They were focused on killing Houthis and Shiites, which major factions of do call for global jihad, and the United States does see as an enemy. So why is the United States involved in this dumb conflict that Saudi Arabia got us involved in? Why did Barack Obama frickin' start a bombing campaign inside of Yemen with horrible incidences? And this is just one where 35 women and children were killed by a U.S. cluster bomb. And again, we have seen the United States, the United Kingdom, continue to actively participate in Saudi Arabian war crimes, targeting Yemeni civilians, targeting impoverished Yemenis farms and agriculture industry, leaving a huge humanitarian crisis that is leaving millions at the risk of starvation. And after examining all this, I have to ask, all you people out there who are protesting Donald Trump at the airports right now, where the fuck were you when frickin' Barack Obama Where the fuck were you when Barack Obama, with his dumb geopolitical freaking goals, backing Saudi Arabia, was bombing, sending drones, sending cluster bombs, butchering, murdering innocent women and civilians, causing millions of people to starve inside of Yemen? Where the fuck were you protesting him when he made that horrible decision? Where the fuck were you when Barack Obama was creating a disastrous human rights violating situation for dumb geopolitical goals, bombing, sending in drones, sending in cluster bombs, leaving millions of people to starve, creating immense human suffering to Yemen? Where the you with your protest signs at the White House? Because I didn't see anybody. We were calling it out here on this independent news channel, but you, the people, decided to neglect that a very important fact. And if you compare the two, not allowing some Yemeni civilians to come into the United States versus what Barack Obama did, there's really no comparison. And this brings me to my bigger point, because if we look at Iraq, if we look at Libya, if we look at Syria, there was no major factions of Al-Qaeda, of ISIS, of radical Islamic terrorists until the United States decided to bomb and overthrow their leaders and make attempts to destabilize their government. And only because of those decisions were people radicalized after there was massive collateral damage, after there was massive corruption, after millions of dollars were shipped out in arms and shipments, and people inside of the Middle East decided to turn to radical Islamic factions. Of course, there's no justifying this in any way, shape, or form, but we have to understand this is a major factor to why people are pissed off and they're turning to radical Islamic terrorism. And if you truly wanted to stop, and if Donald Trump really wanted to end global radical Islamic terrorism, he would put George W. Bush, Barack Obama in jail for war crimes and not continue their failed foreign policy initiatives that are creating more terrorism. If you look at American foreign policy, there's a fire, radical Islamic terrorism. Their answer, pour more gas on it. And that's exactly what we have seen exemplified through world events through the past 16 freaking years. Debate me if I'm wrong on this. I know people are going to be in the comment section, but give him a try. It was just a mistake. No. This was a dumbass move that deserves to be called out, and he deserves to have no freaking support from the disastrous foreign policy that is creating more Islamic freaking terrorism against the people who are not even calling for global jihad.
And I'm cutting it there, but you know what he's talking about? This is something that many of us, and again, that was Luke from wearechange.org, and We Are Change on YouTube. Check him out, subscribe. But this is something we were talking about under Obama, whether it be, issues in Libya, in Afghanistan and Iraq that we were supposedly going to be out of. But definitely in Libya, and then when the whole Syrian conflict and, Yemen kind of playing a part in that. But when we see all this, which Yemen only played a part in the news cycle rather than the actual, the terrorism, because they're more in a fight with Saudi Arabia than the full fight, but they do share a lot of the radical part, but not as much as Saudi Arabia itself does. But he points out where were the anti-war people, the left under Obama. He used a drone to take out a U.S. citizen. And we did not see anything from the anti-war left. Where were they? That means that, well, you have rights as a U.S. citizen until you decide to leave U.S. soil. No. If the U.S. has a problem with you, they come get you and they put you through court. They extradite you back to the U.S. if they're able to. But this wasn't, someone that was doing something wrong. This was a child of someone that did something wrong. So we don't see anything from the anti-war left, but the moment this happens, which is only Trump signing off something Obama was going to kind of leave behind for him. But if Obama had another 4 years, he would have signed it too. And then we would have heard nothing from the anti-war left. And the whole time, this is going on, I'm thinking that whole time, the anti-war left, they're out here now all of a sudden because they're only politically motivated. And mainstream media did it too, and it just it got me in. I seen this article from MSNBC, and I'm like, why weren't they writing this about Obama? You want to see hypocrisy? Look at how they wrote this article, or in your case, I'm about to read it. So listen to how they wrote this article compared to how they covered Obama in Libya and Syria. This coming out of MSNBC. Steve Bannon. A mission in Yemen in which almost everything went wrong. Hold on, didn't a whole bunch of things go wrong when we went for bin Laden? We lost one of our helicopters. Okay. Anyways, we don't, we don't want to question that too much because we got bin Laden. Says, towards the end of the White House press briefing yesterday, a reporter brought a question that may have seemed strange. The president has previously indicated that he would encourage the targeting of families of terror suspects. Is that still his current position? Press Secretary Sean Spicer responded, when did he say that? Turns out it was on December 2nd, 2015, at the height of the Republican presidential primary, when a variety of GOP candidates were eager to tell the party's base how much they supported torture. Trump declared in reference to terrorists, you have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families. They care about their lives. Don't kid yourself, but they say they don't care about their lives. You have to take out their families. As for why this sudden relevant, NBC News ran a striking report the other day about a deadly mission in Yemen on Sunday, which did not go according to plan. In what an official said was the first military raid carried out under President Donald Trump, 2 Americans were killed in Yemen on Sunday, one a member of SEAL Team 6 and the other the 8-year-old daughter of Anwar al-Awlaki, the New Mexico-born al-Qaeda leader, who himself was killed in U.S. strike 5 years ago. The raid in southern Yemen, conducted by the Super Secret Joint Special Operations Command, was intended to capture valuable intelligence, specifically computer equipment, according to a senior U.S. military official. 3 al-Qaeda leaders were killed, according to U.S. officials. Contrary to earlier reporting, the senior military official said the raid was Trump's first clandestine strike, not a holdover mission approved by President Barack Obama. Well, it was a holdover mission, just not approved by Barack Obama. But it still was a holdover mission. This was months being debated under Barack Obama. So it was a holdover, just not approved. The mission involved boots on the ground at an al-Qaeda camp near al-Bada in south central Yemen, the official said. According to the unnamed official described this mission, almost everything went wrong. One Navy SEAL, Chief Petty Officer William Ryan Owen, was killed in a firefight. Several other SEALs were injured, including one who sustained several injuries when their Osprey made a hard landing. The death of the 8-year-old girl, Nawar al-Awlaki, also known as Nora, is generating considerable attention because her father, who was killed by a drone in September 2011, is American citizenship made the strike far more controversial than many related strikes that targeted terrorist leaders abroad. I wouldn't say his didn't. I would say his sons did, but of course they don't want to. They don't want to point out that his son was targeted, was not a terrorist, but was targeted as a U.S. citizen under Obama. They don't want to point that out, but they definitely want to try to go, well, his father, which was a terrorist, was controversial because he, was an American citizen. But he did wage wars, so that's not, controversial. A government is going to strike upon someone that, declares war upon them. That's not something that you wouldn't expect. But his son wasn't that person and still targeted. But of course, they don't want to bring attention to that because then it's not going to bring attention to the daughter the way they want to. They're targeting Trump, not Obama. NBC News report added Karen Greenberg, director of Fordham University Center on National Security, said the girl's death will be a boon to Al Qaeda propagandists. The precipitation will be that it's not enough to kill Al-Awlaki, that the U.S. had to kill the entire family, she said. Well, who killed the son? Oh, you're not. Oh, we'll get to that. Nora or Nawar al-Awlaki is the second of Anwar al-Awlaki's children to be killed by U.S. forces 2 weeks after Anwar was killed in late 2011. His 16-year-old son, Abdullah Rahman, was also struck in a drone strike. U.S. officials said the younger al-Awlaki was in the wrong place at the wrong time, that he was with their intended target, an al-Qaeda leader. International or not, Greensburg said the deaths of... Yeah, hold on. Who authorized the sun strike? And from reports I've read, I don't know. I haven't been able, no one's come out and admitted to them, but many people said they already knew that the son was looking for his father at one point. So even journalists that have gone over to try to talk to, these leaders, controversial leaders of these groups, the government knows they don't target those people. If anything, they follow those people to find other targets. They don't just strike them. I think this was, they knew what they were doing, I believe. She noted that as part of propaganda efforts, terrorist groups have begun to circulate photographs of children reportedly killed by U.S. forces. Photos of Nawar al-Awlaki alive and dead are already circulating widely in Arab media. This is why Sean Spicer was asked about whether Trump still supports the targeting of families of terror suspects. But you see the reporting here compared to how they reported things under Obama? It's very, how should we say, it's pretty hypocritical, I would say. We're going to cover one more Ron Paul Liberty report covering more U.S. bombs in Yemen. And this foreign policy, the foreign policy is something I want to really focus on tonight, because even though many of us see good things that might be coming out of Trump, we can't be blind to the negative things too, and the foreign policy that we have, it's not really changing. It's just continuing. And even people that want to try to stop terrorism have to be able to see that we're not fixing the problem. Probably because we're not truly focusing on what caused the problem.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today, co-host Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. We're going to talk about foreign policy today, believe it or not. There's never a day when there's something important not going on in the world, even though it doesn't get covered by that other media. But something significant happened, since the election and over the weekend, and it's the continuation of Obama's policy. Although I hope for changes in foreign policy, and there are hints, maybe a change in attitude toward Russia, actually this is probably a continuation of Obama's policy, and that's what's going on in Yemen. It was a bombing raid, and it didn't go exactly what it was supposed to. Civilians were killed, and we've stirred up a lot of trouble, a lot of people critical, and once we kill more civilians in a country like Yemen, we make more enemies. So this has been going on. This just didn't start under Trump, obviously, and it's probably was really escalated under Obama.
Yeah, it's a continuation of probably one of the most insane wars in history, although they're all insane. But, the origin of what's happening now in Yemen is the Arab Spring, which, we hold was at least partly, probably mostly, maybe completely cooked up by the U.S. administration under Obama as his plan of remaking the Middle East was the plan. And what it did is really create chaos throughout the region. In 2011, as a result of the Arab Spring, Saleh was deposed. He was the leader of Yemen, and Hadi was installed as president. The people who supported Saleh and the Houthis, who are an ethnic and religious minority related to the Shia practice, but not explicitly Shia, were obviously upset about this revolution, so they joined forces in an attempt to put Saleh back. Well, the Saudis didn't like that at all. They wanted Hadi in there. And Hadi was, by the way, the one who okayed U.S. drone attacks on Yemen. So both the U.S. and the Saudis liked that. So that's the beginning of the war. The Saudis started bombing Yemen to put back their guy, and the U.S. has provided targeting, intelligence, and military equipment. 10,000 civilians have been killed thus far. The country's been decimated.
And they like to bring the Iranians in and say the Houthis are allies with Iran, and that's the problem. We have to stop the Iranians. But that's a fight. It's a real fight going on between the Saudis and Iranians, and people can understand it. It has to do with religion, the Sunnis against the Shia, oil. Of course, our hands aren't clean. That's the problem. We're always involved. It seems like Trump has changed the policy. Obama has changed the policy away from nation building, but that's Trump's policy too. But Trump has already said that more force against the terrorists, and it's easy to say so-and-so is a terrorist when they're merely suspects. Maybe they're involved, maybe they're not. So the continuation, the policy really hasn't changed. I think some people were a little surprised it happened so quickly, but it was already in plans. But it sort of makes my case I worry about, the continuation, that there's not that much difference between two parties, that foreign policy is the same, the Federal Reserve is the same, and all these sorts of things. People get annoyed, oh no, Trump is different. On this issue, it's not different. It's a continuation. We have troops over there. There are bombs, and we have troops on the ground. We got you know, an officer killed over the weekend, and you know the CIA's involved, and you know that the special forces are involved. I guess the person killed was the special forces. Yeah. So we have the military. So we do have boots on the ground. But how many times have we seen or heard, and we sort of talked about this, I just wonder how many troops on the ground over there. If you added up all the CIA agents and all the special forces, you know, we could have hundreds. But the big thing is we give them the bombs, and we support them and give them all the, you know, intelligence gathering and trying to support this wonderful civil libertarian country, the Saudis. This is what is so crazy, you know. And of course, no punishment to the Saudis, and their record is so bad. They're probably one of the worst when it comes to radicalism. They were involved in 9/11, the whole works. Nope, hands off. Don't do anything. I guess maybe there are some business deals over there.
Yeah, you know, it really shouldn't surprise us that the policy remains the same, because the conventional wisdom has not really been substantially challenged, substantively challenged by the new administration. The conventional wisdom is that interventionism will solve our problems in the region. So it shouldn't really surprise us. But, you know, ostensibly what these airstrikes were and the commando raid was to deal with an al-Qaeda cell that they identified in Yemen. And apparently this had been identified under the Obama administration. They decided to wait, the Pentagon decided to wait and let Trump greenlight it, which he did. But, you know, the whole idea of what's happening in Yemen, as I said earlier, is insane, because on the one hand, you have the Houthis aligned with Saleh. On the other side, you have the Saudis attacking them, trying to put the other guy back in, Hadi back in. But you also have this al-Qaeda there. Well, al-Qaeda and the Houthis are mortal enemies. Al-Qaeda is a radical Sunni organization, as we obviously know, and the Houthis are closer to Iran and to the Shia. So you have the U.S. attacking both al-Qaeda and then helping Saudi Arabia attack the Houthis, who are also fighting al-Qaeda. And this is how the billions of dollars are being spent. And it would be more funny if it wasn't for the fact that 300,000 children in Yemen are without food. Half of the population, 14 million people, are not getting food. There's a terrible famine, and yet the bombs continue to fall. I
don't like the word funny. I would say tragically funny. Yeah, you know, it's just a so sad thing. But, you know, I heard one of the military officers, one of our new generals, was saying, well, it was terrible that we lost a soldier, which is absolutely true. Sure. But he died in the service of the United States. He died in working for our national security. He didn't use these words, but generally speaking, the presence of our troops overseas is to spread our Constitution, spread our goodness, and spread the issue of liberty. And they die in the cause of liberty and defending our Constitution. That always bothers me, because these are unconstitutional wars. They're immoral, and we shouldn't be there. And if they want security, someday they're going to have to wake up and say, we're insecure because we're over there killing people. And now, you know, the Yemenis had never had the people there, never were hostile to the Americans. But what about some of these civilian killings? What about the 8-year-old? Isn't that a tragic story?
Yeah, and it's a strange irony, because as you well know, the U.S. President Obama okayed a drone strike against Anwar al-Awlaki, who was a propagandist for al-Qaeda, but he was also an American citizen. If you remember back in 2011, I think it was, he was killed without trial or even without charges being filed by a U.S. drone. He was assassinated, essentially. And then the U.S., a couple months later, went back and killed his son, who was also an American citizen. 16-year-old boy, also an American citizen, and their cousin, who they were having dinner outside. Well, strangely and ironically, according to press reports, in the strike over the weekend on Yemen, his sister was also killed. An 8-year-old young girl was also killed in the strike. So,
and to try to get attention on that, they put a picture of her on the internet, which is really very, very sad. Yeah. But all these things in war are sad, especially, you know, when you realize, at least we come to the realization and the belief that so much of this is unnecessary. You know, what is the purpose behind this? You know, there's a lot of confusion over there, and to think outsiders are going to come in. You say, well, some people may justify, but back in there, it was spontaneous. The people were, there was an uprising in Yemen. We had to overthrow the government, and that is it. But how many of these uprisings in the Arab Spring didn't have some attachment to our CIA and our weaponry, whether it was direct and intentional or indirectly? But, all these, especially most recently, what was going on in Ukraine and, of course, in Syria. Think of the mess that's going on in Syria. That's one thing that I saw a report just today or yesterday that some of the supporters we have who are the moderates that we support, we're sending them better weapons. They said, boy, it's about time we got better weapons. And they're not exactly in there to defend a country or defend Assad. They have different motivations, but many times they're in a position to actually hurt Assad. And remember what Tulsi Gabbard said, who made a trip over there. She says, there are no moderates in Syria. And she had a field trip over there, and she's very emphatic about that.
Among the rebels, you mentioned the Arab Spring and how the U.S. May have been behind it. Well, look at the aftermath of this. This was supposed to be a great people's uprising to overthrow their dictators and have democracy sprouting up everywhere. Well, let's look at where it was you saw most of it. Egypt. Egypt is a dictatorship now, even worse than before. Libya is a total disaster, completely destroyed. Syria is the same. They weren't successful yet. The same. Tunisia, Islamists have taken over for the most part. There's no more freedom than there was in the first place. It's interesting about the justification for the attacks on Yemen. And the president said it today, we are going after al-Qaeda. That's what we're doing. But, Reuters, which, as you know, is pro-interventionist as it comes, in these news agencies, they had a piece just a couple of months ago saying that Saudi Arabia's war on Yemen has made al-Qaeda stronger and richer. So our allies, their actions in Yemen are helping al-Qaeda, and we're ostensibly fighting al-Qaeda while helping the group that's helping al-Qaeda. Makes no sense.
And the countries we fear the most, the ones that we have already bombed, those 7 countries that, and maybe there's some legitimacy to a degree on the justification of watching the immigrants from particular countries like that. Of course, we incited them, but no mention of Saudi Arabia. They won't dare say boo against the Saudis, and that's a difficult story because it's been that way for a long time. And the association with the Saudis and 9/11, I think, is pretty explicit now. The Congress even has, voted on the issue that the Saudis have some responsibility, for the people who were killed on 9/11. And yet, at the same time, here we are allying ourselves to, bomb another country into smithereens. You've seen the pictures on what Yemen looks like. I mean, it's a disaster. And then the civilians, this bombing was significant. I saw 2 reports. Some said 36, others said 47, and there were 8, 10 children killed. And it's like, you can't prevent that from happening. That's where it is, especially, when you're sending off drones and bombs from the air, and the accidents have been happening for a long time. And that's a good way to make us less secure, more enemies. And every time I see that, well, there were 10 civilians killed, but we got the leader of al-Qaeda. Prove to me that you got the leader of al-Qaeda. Oh, well, we have good intelligence. So, anyway, it's awfully aggravating, all because they endorse a foreign policy which should be totally strange to the American ethical beliefs and our Constitution, that this is a moral obligation for us to go about doing these things. And even if they sincerely believed it in their heart, they have to look at the results. I mean, just think of what's been going on since actually 1991, or especially since 2002 and 2003, in the 15 years of our war over there. And just looking at the tragedy of us supporting the same group, as bin Laden when we were not too happy with the Soviets being in Afghanistan. And here we are doing exactly the same thing over. Don't they ever look at history?
You know, it's like we've not learned anything from Vietnam with the whole Vietnam body count, where the only thing that mattered was how many Viet Cong we killed. The same thing is true with Al-Qaeda in Yemen. Okay, we killed 10, but you've just bombed 10 families, and they're going to have someone come up and be the next leaders of Al-Qaeda. They have not learned from history. But you know, the other thing that's very tragic about the continuation of the drone wars is the idea of the signature strikes, you know. And this is that you don't go after a particular person. You know, Joe Smith is a terrorist, we're going to get him. But you go after characteristics, military-aged men, active in certain activities, doing so. So in that, you sort of put a target on a bunch of people who you don't know whether they're terrorists or not. If that doesn't make us less safer by radicalizing people, I don't know what does.
And can't you imagine if we were on the receiving end of something like this, and it was this sterilized killing, you know, the bombs drop out of the sky, and they know that the people, they don't even get a chance to shoot at the people who are bombing them. There's no defense whatsoever. I would think that the hostility will continue to grow. It is my belief that eventually, you know, what's going to happen is they will turn. The seeds have been sown for people to be turned against us. And they say, oh, well, that's their religious beliefs and all that. But I think the tables will be turned against the Saudi government. And that's when some big stuff is going to flow, because we will have to, our government, unfortunately, before and now, will feel very obligated to use troops in there. Same way, what about the stirring up of, you know, like a major fight even with Iran? I mean, we're supposed to be friendlier with Russia, and that's good. We trade and we should be talking to them. But when we go after and say, well, we're going to stir up this trouble, there's some advocating, you know, we mentioned it yesterday, a preemptive strike, you know, on Iran. And that is not how to win friends and influence people, let me tell you.
Well, you know, it's easy to be despondent, you know, with all the things we talked about today. But, you know, as I wrote in the update to the RPI supporters today, I think we should also take heart, because I think now, probably more than ever, our position has a chance to be heard, because I think there will be more frustration with those who hope for something different under President Trump. And I think we have the ability really to influence like we haven't before. So let's end it on a positive note.
Yeah, no, and I've done that for years, is tried to end up with a positive note when I talk about all the problems. And fortunately, when I go to the campuses, it's been well received. Sometimes I would talk for 30 or 40 minutes and tell them about all the problems and give them 5 or 10 minutes of upbeat. And afterwards, many of the young people would say, this was very positive, and they liked it. So, yes, we should emphasize that. But I also think it's very important not to be in denial and thinking that that there shouldn't be somebody to point out maybe the real consequences of what's really going to be around, you know, going on. And I think that's our responsibility, to warn people what's going to happen. Because, you know, since 9/11, just think of how we have been undermining our liberties here at home. You know, the Patriot Act and all these, all the snooping things that our government does. Somebody needs to be warned that there are consequences of this. And the same way with the foreign policy, to think that we can just do this and say, well, we're spreading American exceptionalism. Well, believe me, nobody buys that overseas. And the other thing is what we're talking about, it's really sad. People can disagree with us and maybe debate us, but for the opposition to come and always throw it out, which had been thrown out at me, oh, you don't care about America, you're un-American, you're not patriotic, you don't care about the troops. Well, maybe when the dust settles, people will realize that really caring about America, caring about our Constitution, and caring about our security will mean that they will look at our Constitution and actually become a non-interventionist, mind our own business and protect this country and concentrate on the protection of liberty. I think that would go a long way to working for peace and prosperity throughout the world. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, I don't know how it is that we are where we are, except for part of it has to do with history being rewritten, miseducation, false histories. And, we've pointed this out plenty on the left, but do we actually point it out on the right too? Because the right has become just as much, if not more, of a warmonger. Now, the left tends not to warmonger, but they go ahead and, commit acts of war. Now, the rewriting of history kind of goes both ways. A lot of times they only want us to remember, Jefferson and Tripoli. Because, well, if you have a bunch of Jeffersonian type people, constitutionalists, if we say Jefferson did this, then that kind of plays into what we're doing now, when it really doesn't. But they will play that card. And we've rewritten history to look for our youth now. Is the Middle East is not somewhere to go, check out, these wonderful things in culture and these antiquities, like Egypt. And we've had Disney movies, Aladdin. A lot of these countries we used to be able to go to. Now, this is before most of the youth now, so they don't remember that, and they're only remembering what they're taught in history. For many of us, we're naive to it. We're going, I remember, all these Middle Eastern countries being places where people would go and take these adventures to check out antiquities and, archaeological sites that are just memorizing and show ancient history. And, now we see that ISIS is destroying a lot of those things, and these places you can't go anymore. Well, what's different from then and now? Well, our foreign policy is. We've gone to a position where now we are so offensive to the rest of the world. And this lays on Trump's shoulders. This lays, well, so far on Trump's shoulders, unless he wants to change his foreign policy and learn. But Obama, both Bushes, Clinton, this goes back decades. But where we are now is not recognizable if you took this back, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Yeah, we've had issues with certain countries in the Middle East. But as a American, would you feel safe going to really any Middle Eastern country right now? We've allowed our government to do it to ourselves, basically. We've taken the world, and by intervening, we have become the enemy of the world. before, when we weren't a society and a country that intervened, we were welcomed. We were the, hey, that's the country that doesn't really try to get involved too much. And when they do, it's because all hell broke loose. But that's that country that is successful. It's succeeding. And it's becoming more free for individuals that might have not had freedom the way they do now. Now we're going in the complete opposite direction. And it's not Trump's fault. It's not Obama's fault. It's not Bush's fault. It's all their fault. Everyone played a part in this. They have all helped to expand the empire. And that will be our ruin. And it doesn't mean that it'll come militarily. It could come economically. We talk about, bringing jobs back. Well, we're going to need those jobs back because no one's going to want to trade with us. And it's already gotten that way. But because the U.S. dollar has been the petrodollar for so long, they keep going along. But for how long? And will it be our own undoing or outside influence that'll be our undoing? I think it's going to be a little bit of both. Now, as we go forward, I think the pressures from the right, when we lashed out about all the things that Obama was doing, what's one of the major things that pops out that people on the right bashed and bashed and bashed Obama about? Benghazi. Now, one of the main arguments is that, we had assets in the area that we could have deployed to help. That's the most talked about one. Why is that the most talked about one? Because the second talked about one that only certain people would point out, that those same certain people don't want to point out the bad and other things now that we have a different president. The second thing was, why were we there? There were people that were very, very upset. Why were we there in the first place? Those people on the right that were saying that need to continue to say that. Why were we in Yemen in the first place? We were going after... No. Why were we truly there? Because we were back in Saudi. We were doing Saudi Arabia's dirty work. I said it under Obama, and I'll still say it. Saudi Arabia wants the Ottoman Empire back. They're using the other extremists under ISIS as their little soldiers. They believe that they're bringing the caliphate back. They're doing it for religious reasons at the top. And then in the middle, you have a mix. People doing it for revenge and people doing it for religious reasons. And at the top, I guess you have the same thing. You do have people that they they want to get revenge for something the U.S. did. Is usually one of the arguments you've heard. Um, the problem is under a Republican or Democrat president, it seems that we're helping them create that destabilizing. And we want to talk about the one girl that got killed. Let's talk about all of the children dying in all of this under Bush, under Obama, and under Trump. If we keep up this policy, we will have no friends. Because we're also not looking at the effects that it's having on Europe. Now, Europe plays its own part. They have their own, you know, they got blood on their hands too. But a lot of this is policy driven by the U.S. And Europe's having to deal with the refugee crisis in a way that we aren't. People want to chastise Trump for not wanting to do what Europe's been doing, but in Europe, we've seen what that's done. You have people that want to go on TV and go, Muslims and Islam is not that bad. Sharia law's good. It's not what people make it out to be. But then when you see it, you know, we should let these refugees in. They should have their Sharia law. It's not bad. Sharia law doesn't mean honor killings. Well, we're seeing that happen in Europe. We're seeing the consequences. And part of it is we're telling them, don't integrate at all. Make your home here and make your culture live here. Then, of course, you get the miseducated, right? That go, see, their culture, it's the problem. Well, a lot of these are kind of like our youth. They're growing up in a different world. The youth over there is growing up in a war zone. This is 16 years this has been going on. $16 think about that. It might not seem long to many of us older people, but that 16-year-old, it happened when they were born. They've grown up knowing nothing but the violence, the anger, the corruption. And then we decide we're going to bring all of these people in. And what a lot of people don't know is Syria did have a lot of people that ran from war zones. A 16-year-old has grown up knowing nothing but U.S. being involved in the Middle East. I was around during the Gulf War. Don't remember it lasting 16 years and expanding into multiple countries. There is something wrong if we are not, I don't care if you're on the left or the right or in the middle somewhere. There is something wrong when we don't recognize what is going on. We have made it okay to have a destabilized Middle East with our involvement for 16 years, you're not looking at the full picture that anybody 16 years or younger has known nothing but U.S. involvement in the Middle East, and you don't think that has consequences? Their brothers or sisters or grandmas or grandpas or cousins, their brothers or best friends or girlfriends, their girlfriend's family, their wife's family. A lot of these people have lost family members and friends. And again, even a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, they might have been born after or before our first involvement, but they weren't old enough to realize it. I would say, around 4 years old. If they were 4 years old, they might have a remnants. 4 years old before, our involvement after the 9/11 attacks. They might have a remnants of what it was before 9/11. And I'm talking about the children in the Middle East, not here. We'll get into that here in a second. But the children in the Middle East, for them to ever really truly maybe have any memory of what life was like before U.S. involvement, they probably would have had to been 6, 7, or 8 before 9/11. And they might have those few years of memories that things were nice. People are like, oh, the Middle East has never been nice. Oh, really? Look at Iraq and Libya and the major cities in these countries in Syria before they were attacked. A lot of them were maybe not quite as modern as some Western places, but pretty damn modern. You can look at Dubai. Don't be ignorant to the fact that other countries are modern too. And now let's turn a little bit to our youth. A lot of us remember pre 9/11. The 90s. Remember the 90s? There was a lot of hope in the 90s. We've seen technology starting to really build, which later on in the very beginning of the 2000s led to the, cell phones being something that the everyday person could have. And quickly after that, the smartphone came out. But it took a while for technology to get to a point where then all of a sudden it just sped up. When the computers in the 90s started getting better and smaller, they were going, well, we can take miniature versions of this and put it into those cell phones and make the cell phones do cool things. And, you got the Samsungs and Blackberries that came out that, were kind of in the middle of a regular cell phone and a smartphone, which led to the smartphone. But the 90s, there was a lot of hope for the future. Once the Gulf War was over, things seemed to be getting better. Not everything was great. But what happened after 9/11 that really our youth never got to experience because of. And I would say that would be the police state. You know, the police state has gradually gotten more policey. I don't really know how to describe it, but back in the 90s when you dealt with cops, unless you were hardcore drug dealer, you know, running the streets, you know, your interactions with cops weren't quite as bad. Not saying that we didn't have problems, but if you look at the level of it today, where I've talked to many people, and you know, you always hear now with, you know, if a black person gets pulled over, they're automatically looked at as guilty, blah blah blah. Well, that we want that to be better, but you have to understand that it's gotten worse. You, I understand that black people feel targeted because they've been targeted, but what they have to realize is the police state has been growing. They are not the only targets anymore. Everyone's targeted because of the way policing is done now. Everyone is expected to be a nutcase with a weapon. And I experienced it and had to quickly diffuse it. So, you know, I felt comfortable. I wasn't really diffusing it to make the other person feel comfortable, but that's part of defusing it, was to make the other person feel comfortable, but not with the end goal of them feeling comfortable. The end goal with me feeling comfortable. But broke down on the side of the road. And, you know, of course, cop sees me, you know, break down and pops a U-turn and gets behind me. But knowing I broke down and all that, he's still extremely nervous. Back windows are tinted and everything, and he keeps flashing the flashlight back there. Well, you know, I didn't have anything to hide. I was just broke down on the side of the road. You know, it was one of those things. I rolled down the tinted windows so, you know, he could see, you know, go ahead, look, you know. I want you to feel comfortable, because all I did was break down on the side of the road, and I shouldn't feel uncomfortable. But, you know, it wasn't until I made him feel comfortable that his hand came off of his gun. Except to grab paperwork out of my hand, but he definitely, you know, he had a little bit of uncomfortable feeling about him. So it was one of those things. I tried to diffuse it, and then I, you know, said, you know, thank you for pulling over. You know, I don't feel safe on the side of the road with these cars not, you know, willing to get over. You know, your lights kind of help guide them over, even though we still had some that did not get over. Idiots. It's one of those things that the police have been drilled with fear that every person they pull over is a potential criminal that's going to kill them. Well, yeah, that's true. But it's also true that there's a chance every person you pull over will need your help and be the nicest person you'll ever meet. And I said that to someone, and they go, that's unrealistic to think. I said, but to think that every person you pull over is going to be a crazy killer, is it, you know, is that more logical than every person you pull over is going to be the nicest person you ever meet? You have to go into it in a neutral position. Yeah, you know, this could be trouble, but it could also be someone that needs help. And guess what? When you get in a job, where you're saying, I'm going to go out there and not only just interact, with someone maybe that broke down on the side of the road, or someone that calls for you, or, but you're also going to use the intimidation of force to force a interaction with someone. You will turn your lights and sirens off. And when you do that, or on, and when you turn your lights and sirens on, you're basically telling the person that you're either going to pull over and obey me, or you're going to be jailed or killed. So you're taking that job. You're making that decision. When you make that decision, you better make the decision you're going to go on in as that neutral person. When you pull someone over, when you pull up on someone that might be stranded, be protective of yourself to a point, but also be courteous enough that you yourself don't become more of a threat to a person. Because right now, society is already on the thought process that, they're fearful if you're behind them. I don't know anybody that goes, oh, great, a cop's behind me, I feel safer now. Or, hey, there's a cop parked on this side of the road, I feel safer now. Too many victimless laws are enforced and can quickly escalate to more. And in reality, there's no such thing as a victimless crime. Can't commit a victimless crime, because if there is no victim, there is no crime. So there is no such thing as a victimless crime, other than there is victimless laws that try to legally define you as a criminal. As we go forward, we still have to stay highly focused on what we're teaching and how we're teaching things to the youth. Because many of us, again, we grew up in the pre 9/11 era. We seen the pre 9/11 era. Do you truly feel safer now after all the wars, all the spying? Do you truly feel safer? The youth doesn't remember the pre 9/11. They don't know what it's like. They're easily manipulated, definitely by the academics that are in the public and private sectors of schooling. Know where your kids are going, know what they're teaching, and if you can't find a place that's going to teach real and true history, then you might be left with no option but to do it yourself. And when it comes to the youth or the young adults in the Middle East, we might not be able to change how they feel or think because they've grown up in this. But we can attempt to try. And if all else fails, what can come out of that is the upcoming youth. Don't grow up in the Middle East that is being bombed and ravaged by unrest, where the US of A is stamped all over it. And we need to teach them that growing up in a world that intrudes on your privacy the way the US has become, it's not right now, just like it wasn't right back then. If half of what's going on in the US happened before 9/11, there would probably be a revolution. But they've allowed fear to cloud the Americans' judgment. And where there might have been a small problem that we were going to have to deal with, now there's a large problem that grips the Middle East. And our continued involvement doesn't help the issue. We've made it worse than what it was. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to UCY tonight and tuning in to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY. Don't forget, go to ucy.tv. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's an Amazon button. If you click the Amazon button, it'll take you to Amazon, which UCY partnered with. And you get the same great deal, same great shipping rates. And at the same time, UCY gets a little bit of a kickback from that to help cover operating costs on this end. And you know what? If you want to help out alternative media, but you really don't need to buy anything from Amazon right now, you can always click the Support UCY tab at the top of the page, and you can donate to ucy.tv, which gives us this great platform for me and the other hosts here to get information and news and opinions out to you. And encourage everybody to do their own research on all these topics. And, you know, it's one of those things that mainstream media is falling off. No one believes them. You know, I covered that MSNBC article, how it's so slanted against Trump, but they weren't reporting like that when Obama was doing a lot of the same things. You know, alternative media has been that place that many people have found that you get people that stick to their principles and their values. And, you know, it doesn't matter if it's a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, a Constitutional Party, or a Green Party candidate that wins and becomes president. If I'm anti-war, I'm anti-war. If I believe in freedom, I believe in freedom. And I hope more people come to, you know, these realizations where it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or Democrat or other party in charge. Those anti-war people come out, or those the true anti-racists come out when there's actual problems. But right now, what I'm seeing is agenda-driven protest and, you know, organizations running things. And that doesn't mean that everybody that's a part of it isn't sincere, but they're being manipulated, I believe. Also, don't forget to check out Amagi Metals. If you go to antityrannynews.com/metal, that'll take you to Amagi Metals. Again, same great prices, same great shipping rate. Nothing changes there, but Anti-Tyranny News gets a little kickback from that to help cover our operating costs on our end of the network. So definitely check them out. One of my favorite sources for silver and gold, Amagi Metals. Again, if you go to antityrannynews.com/metal. Thank you all for tuning in.
him. Get